This is Disc Golf for Beginners Part 2. For those of you that haven't seen Part 1, I'll link it up here so you can check it out. To kind of summarize what Part 1 was about, it was mostly about people that are brand new to disc golf that don't know anything about disc golf, or at least very little. They don't own a disc, or they've never thrown one, or have only thrown one a few times or whatever. Just kind of gave them some tips on what discs to get, where to get them. So I'll fill in the blanks for those of you that are just watching just now. So in this video, what I'm going to mostly help you with is how to choose a disc based on stability, and how to choose a disc that best fits in your skill set. Because in the last video, I mostly sent you to one place to send everybody to, if everybody's got a Dick's Sporting Goods in their area. That's why I sent everyone there, because they all sell kind of the same disc, mostly Innova. And that's usually the best place to start, because there's a lot of Dick's Sporting Goods or a place called Dunham's or something like that, which are kind of the same thing. So I told everybody that's the best place to go if you don't know anything about disc golf, because it's less intimidating to purchase at that place, because there's not people that are surrounding you and making you overthink about what disc to choose and all that kind of a thing. So this is more the next level. Like, if you want to be able to choose a different disc instead of what you see at a Dick's Sporting Goods or wherever store it is that you have that's limited, obviously you're going to want to start searching online. So that's what I'm going to try to help you with, how to choose a disc based on numbers, speed, glide, turn, and fade, that kind of a thing. So try and simplify it as best as I can so that I don't confuse anybody. So let's get into it. Alright, so on pretty much every disc manufacturer, you'll see a set of numbers that are at the bottom of a disc. Unless it's like an old Discraft where they used to have their old flight rating, which is like a number with a decimal in it, dictating their own stability. They have their own methods, or at least they used to. They kind of changed that now, so pretty much everybody uses speed, glide, turn, and fade. That's the 4 numbers that you're going to see on the disc. Obviously, the first one's speed. The higher the speed, the easier that disc is to get to go further, depending on arm speed. So just because a disc says it's a speed 14 doesn't mean that you can throw it further than you can, say, a speed 7 or a speed 6 or even a speed 5 or something like that. So that just dictates that it's lower profile compared to a putter. So this cuts through the wind a lot more than a putter would. So that's why it's speed 11, speed 12 through 14 or whatever, or higher. So the second number, glide. Glide is basically an indication of how a disc tendency to stay in the air longer. A disc with a lot of glide is just easier to, it just has more glide. I mean, that's really the only way to put it. I mean, just, you don't want an airplane with no glide. That would be scary as shit. You want to be in an airplane that's got lots of glide. So more glide means it wants to stay in the air a lot longer. Less glide means it wants to get to the ground a lot faster. So we'll explain a little more about that later. All right, the third number is turn. Now, turn is basically an indicator of, just like any of the numbers are, one of the big indicators of an understable disc. So if it's like a -1, -2, -3 to -5 or whatever it is, the higher that negative is an indicator of it being an understable disc, which means that it's a little more beginner friendly. But that number has to be coupled with other numbers in order for it to actually be considered understable, because there are discs that are a negative turn, like a -1, -2 or whatever, but that's where the last number comes into play, the fade. Fade is basically low speed stability. This is basically the indicator of the disc flight at the end of the flight. So as a disc is spinning really fast, it's at its optimum flight, if you can get it to that level. And then once it starts to slow down, the disc loses that stability, and that's where the fade kicks in. And the more fade that it has, the sooner it's going to want to come out to the ground. Less fade means it's going to want to go forward still a little more and just kind of have a gradual decline to the ground, but not as dramatic as like something like this flick. Once it loses its stability, it just dumps like this, as opposed to something like this Essence. It'll kind of have a gradual drop to the ground. And if it's even more understable, it'll just drop straight to the ground, flat on its bottom. So if you want a disc that's going to be able to go further, as a beginner, that's basically going to be one of your biggest goals. Once you get past being able to actually throw a disc, you're going to want to be able to throw farther, which is not your biggest thing to worry about. Putting is more important, but you're going to want to avoid something with a lot of fade at the end, unless there's some negative turn to offset it. So for instance, this Cedar from AGL is an 11.503. Speed 11, great speed, not too crazy. Got tons of glide with a 5. Doesn't have any turn though, so it's not really gonna give you that turnover to the right where it's gonna flip and carry over like turn does to get you, you know, a little more distance or whatever. And it also has tons of fade, so pretty stable based on just those numbers alone, unless you got a lot of arm power, and then you can overcome a lot of those numbers. So so that's not the best place for you to start. You can start there if you want to, but something like let's get something understable. Something like a Mamba. A Mamba is also a speed 11. It has a glide of 6, so it's even more glidey, same speed as that disc. It's got a -5 turn and a 1 fade. So that -5 is a lot of the disc right there, because even though it has that 1 turn, 1 fade at the end, that -5 is basically taking over a big chunk of all of that fade that it has at the end. So kind of look at it like that. Like if it's like a -2-1, you're still going to have some good stability in it for the most part. You're going to be able to get it to flip a little bit at some point. And that's dependent on arm speed also, and the speed of the disc as well. But like for me, a Mamba is like super easy to flip over without throwing really hard, especially like a champion Mamba or something like that. Plastics matter too, and we'll get into that later. But when you're looking for something understable, the 2 key things that I look at are those last 2 numbers really. The turn and the fade are the last 2 numbers that I look at the most. I want something that's going to have a little bit of flip, so I want like a -2, -3 turn, but I also want it to be able to finish at the end too, so that it's not just turning the entire way. I want something that's going to have a finish at the end, which is really dependent on what you want. Some of them you don't want to, you want it to turn over. Something like this is good for something that's just going to keep turning over. We're talking right hand, backhand here. But if you wanted something with a good bit of turn on it, but still have some finish to it, you're going to want that to be a little higher than like a 1. Ideally, my ideal number for this disc would be like 11, 6, -5, 3. Would probably be ideal for this disc, because that would mean I could still get it to flip like I want it to, but at some point, once it starts to lose its stability, it's still going to want to come out of it. So it's going to go, but it's going to come back at the end also. So if you're looking for understability, those are the last 2 numbers that I would look at. You want a nice negative up there, and then you want either a 1. You don't want anything higher than a 3 really. For a new person, I mean, for most pros, the sweet spot is like a -1-3, like a Destroyer or something like that. Lots of discs are like that, or a 0-3 or something like that. You can just kind of substitute those numbers with one another, and they kind of offset each other in a way. Kind of like glide also. Glide is also kind of a good indicator of stability as well. You know, a disc might have, take for instance, something that had say it was a speed 9, like this one right here, for instance, the Felon, one of my favorite discs of all time, one of the best discs ever made in my opinion. It's a speed 9, glide 3, turn 0.5, and fade of 4. So super overstable out of the box. Not right now because it's been beat up a little bit, but that glide 3 and that fade 4, because it doesn't have that much glide compared to the average disc, probably has a glide of 4 or 5 or higher if it's, for the most part. I mean, when you get into the overstable realm, you're going to see more of the 3s and 4s, because those, you want those to be able to fight through the wind and stuff like that. So, but say for instance you had a disc that was, say, a glide 5 and then a fade of like 0. Okay, for instance, I'll show you these because this is perfect. All right, take a Mako 3 for instance. This is a 5500. So pretty much dead straight is what the numbers would indicate, because it's a perfect speed that pretty much anybody can throw. It's got plenty of glide. It's not going to want to deviate to the right because it doesn't have a lot of turn, and it's not going to want to finish really hard because it doesn't have a lot of fade. Now, if you substitute one of those numbers, say the last number, and you put a 2 on it, you would get something a little bit more overstable, but not crazy. You would get something like this AGL Magnolia, which is a 5502, which is not a whole lot more overstable than this, but it just has a tad bit more stability at the end of its flight, depending on the user also. To me, those are pretty. The flight patterns of these two discs are pretty similar, but this one will handle winds a little bit better, and certain arm speeds a little bit better. But say for instance, you took that second 5 and you made it like a 3 or even a 4, something like that. You've taken away its ability to stay in the air as long, so it wants to get to the ground. So even though it doesn't have that much fade on it, you've basically created more fade on it because it's not a disc that's going to want to stay in the air as much, because you took the ability of the disc to want to stay in the air. Now it wants to get down to the ground a lot quicker. So you're not going to be able to throw it as far just based on that one number. That's kind of what I'm trying to say. Like that, you can substitute glide for fade is what I'm saying. So if you don't have enough, if you want something that's overstable and there's not enough fade, look at the glide, because that can definitely have a factor on it. Just kind of like take a Rhino for instance. This is a 2103. Has hardly any glide, and it's got a 3 fade, and it's a speed 2. So this is a pretty overstable putter for the most part. That's why a lot of people use it as the throwing putters. Calvin Heinberg uses this. You could even talk about this is actually less stable than that. This is an AVR X3. Actually it's probably a little more stable really, because this is actually not the AVR 3, this is the X3. I think this is a 3203 or something like that. But you're just basically substituting different numbers, and you get different flight patterns, and you get different stabilities. And this is kind of how I started learning and researching, is what these numbers mean and how I can choose a disc based on it. And what I found is that I liked a disc I liked high-speed disc at the time, because I was able to throw them pretty well. So I chose anything that was speed 11 or higher for drives, and then I would use something that was like a speed 8 or a 9, something like that. That had some stability, but not too much. Like I didn't pick anything that had a ton of fade at the end until later on. So here's what I did. I'll break it down for you how I did it. The first 2 discs that I ever purchased online, not at a store, were a Dynamic Disc Felon and a Dynamic Disc Freedom. Obviously, this Freedom is not real. I don't actually have a Freedom because I got rid of it because it was way too understable. But I kept a Felon, and as you know, if you look at the numbers of those discs, they're practically 2 different discs. This is super overstable. The Freedom is not overstable. Even though it's high speed, the numbers are what make it not high speed. A disc can be a high speed disc but still be understable. If you really want to know where you fall, take a really overstable disc and a really unstable disc and just work your way from the overstable down into the more stable, and then work your way from the understable up to the more stable. Just kind of work with those numbers, the speed, the glide, the turn, the fade. Mostly looking at, from the understable side, looking at the turn and the fade, and then on the stable side, looking at the fade and the glide, and kind of using those numbers to justify whether, all right, I think this is a little too stable for me. Maybe I'll find something that's like even though it's got the same numbers, maybe it's a speed 7. Maybe I can handle a speed 7 because it doesn't require as much arm strength to throw a speed 7 as it does a speed 9 with all these same numbers. Same way with your drivers, drop down to like a speed 9. Like this is 11503, maybe throw a Thunderbird, which is like a 9502, and that might be perfect for you. You just have to play with the numbers and use them as a guide. They're not perfect. They're definitely not perfect. Some discs are absolute proof of that. They're just not perfect. So they're just guides of how to do it. And hopefully some of this made sense to you in my roundabout way of trying to say it. But just start on one end of the spectrum and work your way back. Or do what I did and start on both ends and then just work your way to the middle. And what you might find is actually kind of interesting, because I used to not be able to throw the Felon, and it became a disc that I kept in my bag for years and years. The Freedom went away, but the Felon stayed, because the Felon was awesome. So that's what I recommend. Try that. Look online. Go to infinitedisc.com. They're really good about breaking down flight numbers, and you can actually search specific flight numbers in the advanced section or whatever it is. It's pretty crazy how you can break down all the different stabilities and find something that's like exactly what you want in your stability, or at least close to it. So just play around, get out there, throw different discs. That's what you got to do. You just got to get out and throw and have fun doing it. And hopefully some of this made sense. If not, you can't win them all. And also, I would recommend you go to I'm going to recommend a website or a YouTube channel. I recommend this YouTube channel called Best Disc Golf Disc. They will really break down all the stuff that I just said even better, and probably make sense of stuff that I didn't much better, because that is one of the best YouTube channels for disc golf in the world, in my opinion. So Best Disc Golf Disc on YouTube, go to them and then go out and start shopping online. It's pretty much inevitable that you're going to have to shop online. Not everybody has a disc golf store in their backyard. Not everybody has a Teddy Peddler, an Aha Shack, or a Too Far Under Par at their call. So you're gonna have to shop online sometimes. So hopefully this helped you. If not, check out the links below for places that I recommend to help you with stuff like that. So that's all I got. Thanks for watching. Peace.